okay, Spark. It's not beyond room.
This will be pretty fun.
There we go.
Okay, fantastic.
You're not prepared. I'm not going to be using this.
Oh,
I
okay.
just got to make sure it's ready for the next panel.
So hi,
Nice, Barf.
welcome to Writing Technologies and Formatting. I joke that this is the panel where I just do nothing but go, get word, get word, get word, get word, and then send everyone out, but that's not quite the case. So I'm Sparv.
I'm Mog Moogle.
I'm HXP Coriander.
Cool. And we are qualified because, start on your end.
On my end?
Yeah.
I edited a couple anthologies, I guess.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
They just kind of threw me on the panel. I'm not really qualified.
You submit to a lot of publications and go through the edit processes.
Yes, I do.
And as of volume 10, I am editing Fur Planet's Fang anthology. So we all have strong opinions and lots of interesting knowledge and facts about how to work with technology for writing. Now, generally speaking, like a lot of this plays towards submission for publication or working with an editor digitally. We're not going to, exclusively focus on that if people have other questions or things they want to know about. Like this is here for you guys. It's really not for just going. Eh. So, I guess show of hands. How many people here use Microsoft Word?
For the editing process, yes.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's cool. That's a lot of you. Let's see. If you're not using Microsoft Word, how many people are using a free version of something like it? LibreOffice, OpenOffice. Okay, raise your hands. Okay, a couple of you. Anybody using Apple Pages? Not a one of us.
Not anymore.
Okay, and finally I'll ask about my pet, my beautiful thing, Scrivener. All right, we got some Scrivener users. Good call. All right, so that tells me sort of where we are. So what do you guys think are some of the most important things about tech that you need to know when it comes to writing and getting it formatted in such a way that it's usable?
Control F.
Yeah.
You want to be using something that you know the other person will have, because when you convert a file type from one to another, it can mess up the formatting tremendously. So that's one of the reasons why, like Sparf was saying, Word is kind of important to have. That way you can toss it to an editor or to a publisher, and odds are they're going to have that kind of file. And I've heard of other programs cutting out comments off of Word documents, stripping out certain kinds of special characters. There's just so much that can go wrong.
I lost, on my very first published story, I lost all of my editor comments for my edits because I used ODT to convert it to doc. And then they did their comments and sent it back to me, and when I converted it back to ODT, it erased all of their comments.
The big one, the horror story. I was shown this when it had happened. A very close friend, an editor, was doing some work for one of the publishers on a pretty large novel that someone had written, and had entered comments and things throughout and sent it across. The person in question was using OpenOffice, I think, and had not really told anybody that's what they were using. When it got in finally, and things had been changed, so they did edits, when it got sent over the second time, wherever the comments had lain in the line, which was often in the middle of words, there was a space. Mog brought up Control F, or on the Apple, Command F, which is find, for find and replace. You can fix a lot of problems with find and replace. You cannot fix that, because you cannot find, it's not going to know. If you tell it to find a single space, it'll find every single space in the document. You'll never get through it. That at that point, I believe, was the point at which the publisher grimly set their jaw and proceeded to purchase Office for said author.
Ooh, I know who this was then.
Yes, you do. That author does not write short work.
No.
So, which leads me into I love that you brought up Control F, because Control F will save your life in multiple instances. Foundationally, there's something that I take to heart, which is never do anything with a keystroke that you can do with an automatic setting on your program. The big one that comes to mind is paragraphs. Paragraphs, it'll come out looking okay on the page when you look at it if you go down, okay, tab, new paragraph. If you do that, that creates all kinds of havoc when you go to load that into InDesign for printing. Because the tab is a character. It's not just 5 spaces, which are, by the way, also characters. Everything that a word processor does is with invisible characters. So you have a tab character, you have the space character, you have all of these formatting marks, and you don't want those floating around. Because how many of you have ever had the experience using a word processor where you have made something italic, you made the wrong thing italic, and then you unitaliced it, or unbolded, or changed the font or something, and then later, when you went to do something with it, that font turns back up and you don't know why or how. Yeah, that's why. It's that invisible formatting that's all a part of this.
Something that's kind of fun to do is actually to select show hidden characters and see all of that stuff in your document, just to get an idea of what's going on.
That can come in real handy when something just won't format right and you're trying to figure out why.
Yeah, and if you, when I bring up tabs is a big bugaboo for a lot of editors, a lot of publishers. It causes so much havoc. In every one of these programs that we can talk about in Word or in OpenOffice, there's a little ruler at the top. You can set your indents just based on that. If you can't find it in the paragraph menus and where all it is in settings to set it exactly, you can set your first line indent using that little ruler, and it will. You sometimes have to tell it to show ruler, like in Word by default here it's not there, but you see at the very top, it's kind of hard to see on there, but where my pointer is, if I set this over a 1/2 inch, now all of my paragraphs are going to be indented properly, and I'm not going to have to do any tabs. I'm not going to have to do spacing or dragging things around. It's going to make everything nice, neat, professional, and it's going to save your editor's time. It's going to save your publisher's time. It's going to save you time in the long run, because if you're taking up their time, they're going to send it back to you to fix, and then you have to do that anyway. That's something I lost the train of thought, and say, like I said, never use a keystroke when you can use a setting. The indent is the big one for that. But also, if you really want to get into it, like when you see a submission guideline from an anthology from a publisher, what the manuscript formatting is, you need to follow that, and it often helps if you make a new template for that, so that you set all the options. Like if they want, like right now, Microsoft Word defaults to Calibri as a default font. The reason they do that is because they don't want to have to pay royalties on whatever fonts that end up there, and they own Calibri. They made it. They also made Comic Sans, so do with that what you will. But you can make all those changes and then save a new template, and then you can open that template when you're going to work on a manuscript, and then you don't have to worry about this every single time. So a lot of what we talk about up here is just to make your life easier, in as much as getting past all of the tech that's in the way of putting words on the page. Oh, I know what it was. You talked about formatting issues.
In what context?
When we were talking about hidden characters,
Oh,
you
yeah.
brought that up.
Yeah.
The other trick for that, every computer has a base text editor on it. Windows computers has
Oh, yeah.
Notepad. Macs have, I forget what it's called,
Text
but
edit.
text edit. Those things don't have formatting characters like that. They don't have fonts. They don't have. They are pure raw text. If you ever can't get something to work, absolutely can't get it to work, copy the whole thing and paste it into Notepad.
I was going to say, one of the ways that we fixed my story, I was working with Mando and Munchkin on Fragments of Life's Heart. One of the ways we ended up fixing it was to paste it into a plain text editor, save it, and then re-import it back into Word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's your emergency eject switch, and that will almost always work. I can't think of a time it wouldn't, but I don't like to deal in absolutes. I'm not a Sith.
What?
More thoughts? I don't
like-
want to ramble forever. Be the only one.
Well, it starts to become like a tutorial on how to use Microsoft Word.
It does, but I was gonna point out some stuff about manuscript format as well. Stuff that's outdated that people keep doing.
Oh yeah, don't use
yes.
typewriter spacing. For the love of God, do not use typewriter spacing.
Yes.
You mentioned fonts. Could you expand upon those?
Yes, it's where water comes out of no. So what we talk about when we talk about fonts, if you want to get really technical, we're talking about typefaces. Font is bold, italic, underline, but we all just call them fonts, and that's because language is descriptive, not proscriptive. And for your font, you want something that is standard. So really, just use Times New Roman.
Yeah.
Unless your submission guideline says they want something else, I don't know why they would, but I've known some really strange editors. Times New Roman, it's the same one that they always demanded in school for all your papers. They either wanted that or they wanted Courier New. Don't use Courier. It can be useful to see how something flows on the page, but that's more of a visual, how is it looking? Does that paragraph look too long kind of thing? That's not really a technical skill, that's just a way of looking at it. When I mentioned manuscript formatting, there is a standard guide that was used in the publishing industry forever. It's the Shun guide, S-H-U-N-N. It's right. Thank you. I think it's been updated, but the last time I looked at it was a while back because I wanted to look up. It's called standard manuscript formatting, and there are things that you do that make every manuscript that a publisher gets look right, so they don't have to think about it. They know where all that information is, and they can deal with it. But what it used to say was double-spaced, monospaced font like Courier New, and then it had things like bold or italics would be converted to underlining, and curly quotes would be straight quotes, and just all of these things that would be useful in manual typesetting or in early digital typesetting and easy OCR like scanning in the early days. None of it's necessary anymore because we're all working digitally. I think some people still print out and occasionally do edits on the printed page because it makes sense for them to do it, but it eventually goes back into a digital form and goes back out. So what it is now, it's been updated. You don't leave a space between, you don't double space your manuscript typically. You definitely don't want to do double spaces after punctuation. A lot of people were taught that. It used to be correct. It's no longer the accepted standard. The best thing you can do for yourself is to break the habit. The second best thing you can do for yourself is Control F, space, replace with space before you even submit it.
Because your editors will get really mad at you if you don't.
And that's one of those things. It's easily fixable.
Yeah.
But it's just 30 seconds of, oh, come on, I have to do that too, and you don't want to give people reasons to grumble.
Or they haven't had their coffee yet, and it looks weird, and they can't figure out why, and then they're like halfway through, and then they finally realize you've done the double space thing. And they're like,
I did that one time. I had not had my coffee, and I had only had a few hours of sleep. I was staring at something, and I'm like, what is wrong with the formatting of this? and I'm trying to change the font size. I'm selecting everything, making sure it's set to 12 and Times New Roman. I'm bolding it and unbolding it in case that works for some reason. And then I figured out what it was. I was like,
Yeah, and because everything's digital, font doesn't matter as much, just as long as it's super legible. Like, you don't want to use like Chiller for the entire manuscript, or Comic Sans, or WYSIWYG, or Wingdings. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah. Because most of the time the publisher will just select all and then change the font.
yeah. It's one of those things that it's a courtesy more than
Yeah.
anything. It's a courtesy, and it's also proving that you've read the submission guidelines, because most of the time the submission guidelines will tell you what you're supposed to be doing.
It's how they verified that you actually read the rules and you actually cared enough to pay attention to want to get published.
It's a subtle test, really.
Like, I used to have a professor, and like one quiz out of the year, he put a line in one of his tests that said, if you bring me a cupcake next quiz, you'll get 100%. And like, there were so many people that never read that like maybe once a year he'd have somebody bring him a cupcake for the next test and just get an A and be able to walk out.
Yeah, there are stories of teachers doing that kind of thing all over the place, but it's kind of an indicator of what you're going to be like to work with. Do you have attention to detail? Because especially in small press, and furry publishers are micro presses. There's 2-3 people who own it maybe, and some people who edit for them but aren't really employees. No furry publisher has staff per se. So the real crux of it also is, and this is a discussion that I've had a lot in the writing community in recent times, and that is, people tell me, well, it's a little bit insensitive to demand people own a specific piece of software in order to do this. And I said, well, here's the thing. Like, you can do your writing in anything you want to do it in terms of, if you're not doing it professionally or trying to do it professionally. If you're trying to do it professionally and you can't manage a copy of Word, in the furry fandom, I don't know of a single publisher, and I am at least I'm on a name basis with the furry publishers myself. I don't know of any of them who would look at you and go, no. If you said, look, I literally cannot afford to buy a subscription to Microsoft Office, or I can't run it because the computer I have, and the only one I have is whatever, out of date or whatever, they will go, okay, we now know that is a thing. We will work with you if you need to use OpenOffice, LibreOffice, or one of those free alternatives. The trick to it is you talk to them beforehand. Mm-hmm. Because all of these problems we've talked about have just been, well, they just did it and assumed that it would be fine because it outputted a Word file. And very often that's not the case. LibreOffice has gotten a lot better. OpenOffice, not quite so much. Google Docs, unless you're all working in Google Docs, don't bother. Just don't even waste anyone's time. Mm-hmm. It is absolutely not worth the effort. Yes?
You know how you said you're supposed to double space? Is there an option, and I'm assuming you indent, is there an option to single space and left justify everything, and then you leave a space between paragraphs? Because I've seen that a lot.
There is in Word, and in most of the Word clones, there's a space after carriage return.
I mean, it's acceptable to publishers. Like, is that not cool to do it that way?
Let's ask a publisher.
Hi. So, really the only thing that's an issue is when you do a secondary line break in between paragraphs. So it's like paragraph, like return, paragraph, which people will do in draft mode just to keep it separate, but there is no real easy way to fix that when it comes to the formatting stage, so you'll end up having to go through each and every paragraph and go, okay, end of the line, delete, return to get it to go to the correct next paragraph, delete, return to get to the next formatting. So as long as there's only one return between your end of your last paragraph to the next one, really at that point it doesn't matter, because once we import it into like InDesign, it will fix itself. Does that answer your question? Okay.
So there are some things you can do with that miracle Control F that we talked about. It doesn't always work. I always have to look it up because I never need it. There are characters you can search for that will help you find those carriage returns. I think I know you can. I think it's like caret P. It makes it on a PC. It might be caret P. Let me see what I can do here. Let me see if Control F will work and see what it'll do, because it's one of those things that could change any minute, and like 3 users will ever notice it, and so Microsoft won't care. Yeah, see it highlighted. Caret P will find the carriage return. If I do caret P, let's see if I have to space it or not. No, thank you. Stop it. See, this is. I'm such a useful person now. Yeah, you can find them and replace them with a single if you use caret P, but you have to look those up. Yep. Because you can't just go find return because it's just going to try to search for an empty box. And that's the kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that when I get something that looks wrong, I will go through and do. If I start editing something and I find tabs instead of indents, so this is not really indented. That's what you can spell. And then if I need to go and find it, I can find, I think that's T. Yeah, see it highlighted the tab. I can find all the tabs and just find and replace all with nothing, and it'll get rid of all of them. It's just an extra step that the person on the receiving end is going to have to do. And if you get it back and then you add more tabs, then they have to do it again, and it just adds time to the process. And the idea here is to make everything as easy for everybody along the chain as possible. Thoughts? Things you would like to bring up?
I'll have more comments when we get to like scripter and stuff like that.
Okay. Questions?
Okay, so you're talking about a lot of manuscript format stuff. Is there like a standard document we can look at for this, or is it just kind of, we started with this version but it's out of date and that's the reference we have? So
there are websites that do have the information on it that is up to date. The one that I think even Shun is updated now. I might be wrong about that, but there are resources easily found online. The big things that are different are the don't bother changing to courier, don't bother doing the underline instead of italics. The title page stuff is all the same. The general layout is almost all the same.
So
it's just
instead of a monospace font, you use Times New Roman on the cover page.
Times New Roman unless the publisher wants something different. I don't ever see them really wanting anything different. If they don't care, you just do Times New Roman.
Like if you're printing outside of furry, sometimes they can be super hyper specific because it's like how they initiate their culling process. Like they open up your document, and if they don't see what they want in the first 2 or 3 sentences, they just chuck you and they don't even bother to read anymore.
Like how I do resumes.
Yeah, and it's not that they're being mean, it's that they have a lot to go through. I mean, furry publishers' slush piles are huge, and mainstream publishers are orders of magnitude larger.
And furry editors will sometimes work with you more than a normal editor ever would.
Right.
Like, I've actually pretty much rewritten a story for someone once because it had good bones, but they just did some things wrong, and I was like, this has potential, so let me take this over.
And yeah, that's the other thing is that editors inside the furry markets, we do a lot more developmental editing on stories than you're ever going to get outside. If you submit a story with talking animals to Asimov's magazine, it's a sci-fi story and it's good but not great, and they just go nah. And you're not going to get feedback probably. You could ask, but it's probably not going to happen. They just don't have the time. And inside furry, often it'll be, we'll accept this conditionally upon the editing process if it shapes up. Okay. That's sort of a big difference here, and it's something that really you have to understand about because the process is very different than going through it in the mainstream. Because in the mainstream, often the editorial process is, here are your typos, and this phrasing is awkward, fix that. And it comes back quickly, you do it, and you send it in. I've only ever had that experience one time in a furry anthology, and that's because the editor worked a lot outside of furry, and she didn't fool with developmental editing. If the story was good enough, then it was good enough when it came in, and it was just minor fixes.
So I noticed that when you Google standard manuscript format, the first thing that comes up is Wikipedia, and it is the outdated shun. You actually have to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 results before you get to the updated shun manuscript. So yeah, first thing people are seeing is still the outdated manuscript.
I wonder if our in-fandom publishers maybe should find a link and put it up on their site so we all know. We all have a place that's not Wikipedia to find it. That'd be worth asking. Anyway, note to self.
I had to half-ass it because I'm looking through, it's like, I don't know which one. Like, I know this has to be outdated. So
Like,
Yeah.
sometimes ask the editor. Like, they're totally going to be cool with you just asking a question. Like, if anybody had come to me with a question about altered states, I would have no problem answering it. Like, no one said anything to me before the stories came out, and I was just like, okay.
Now, I will want to segue over into talking about Scrivener a little bit very soon. I want to tell you a couple more things that are in Word and most of its clones, like OpenOffice, LibreOffice. I'll do this. The key critical thing in an editorial process now in 2019 is track changes. And track changes in Word is on the review pane, but that's the first thing you do. You turn that on. Once you don't have to have it on when you are writing the story, but when you start on the editing process, that needs to be on, because anything that you change, then you can see what has been changed. So it'll put it over as like a comment. You can go back and see, oh, I did that, and that was a mistake. Let me pull what I can out of this and rework it. It lets the editor see what you've been doing, and then they can comment on the changes. It's sort of the core of all of this is track changes. That's why we go Word. Yes?
I would strongly recommend having a backup before you turn that on.
Yeah.
Older versions of Word will corrupt documents with that.
Yes.
Like, one of the things that I've seen happen is somebody converted it over to one of the free softwares after it had been comments, and it took all of the comments and all of the changes and they inserted it into the document as plain text. So like, this document was just this mess of like comments and different edits, and there was no way to tell what was what, and it was just a nightmare.
He rode forward, his sword raised. You know, I really don't think this works, but we should move this.
And then one more thing about Word, like the Microsoft Suites package, you could actually share with friends and stuff. So you could actually like get Microsoft from a friend, or like a bunch of you could go into Microsoft together and pay like $1 a month or something like that.
Yeah,
or you can find old versions of Word on eBay all the time.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have to pay Microsoft monthly if you don't want to, or a giant price up. You just kind of have to.
You don't want to get anything that's older than the ribbon interface.
Yes.
Which means you don't want Office XP. That's before the ribbon.
I wouldn't even go like anything below 2010.
No, I think 2010 is the ribbon actually. Or no,
Didn't
it's
they have the
anyway.
ribbon in 07?
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can
2010
say-
is about the earliest you want to go,
Yeah.
and even then, that
And for Mac, don't get 2011. It crashes all the time.
yeah, I
don't know about Macs.
I
he's
had
exactly
it for
right.
years. I had to upgrade for track changes to stop crashing it.
So I want to tell you guys a horror story. He brought up backups. You brought up backups, and we brought up backups. This is my horror story. There is an anthology that comes out every year from Silver Wolf Press called Heat. I was working last minute, and by last minute I mean day of deadline. I'm doing massive edits to this story to get it down under the max word count and coherent, and to get it sent in. I am cutting things. I'm cutting massive amounts of story that are irrelevant to this plot that I wrote, and I'm like, okay, let me take that out. I recommend that people do something along these lines anyway. Make yourself a document where you keep all of that stuff that you cut, so that if you need it back or you want to repurpose that text somewhere else, you can do that. You'll know what you've done to it. You have it. It's not work you're throwing away. You're putting it in a folder for later. I saved my document, went to exit Word, and then I looked away for something, and I went back and I went close Word, and it says, you have not saved changes to this document. And I said, oh, that's weird. I thought I did. So, pure human error, I did save as, and I clicked on my story file, and I hit save. I overwrote my story with the things I cut out of my story. No problem. No problem. I was smart. I was writing at my dock for this Mac, so I have multiple things going on. I used an online cloud-based backup. I used a Time Machine hard drive, and I was writing and saving this stuff in OneDrive, which does versioning. Mm-hmm. So if I can get an old version of the file back, no problem. So let's go to OneDrive and get that file back. Open OneDrive. Sign in to OneDrive. It had been saving it locally in the OneDrive folder that would eventually be synced had I signed in. Okay. Still okay. I will probably have to redo some work, but let me see what's in Crash Plan. I go into my Crash Plan, newest version yesterday, 3 p.m. That's over 24 hours ago. I did a huge chunk of this work then. Okay. Let me go to my Time Machine. 4 hours or 6 hours old. Not perfect, but I still had it. I still had most of it. But I'm freaking out, and then at that point I had to ask for an extension and get the edits redone, which I got and I submitted. But I am serious about backups, and this happened to me. So back up early, make sure your backups are running, and have multiples. Dropbox used to be another go-to for people. If you're paying for it, it's fine, but they have since dropped to a single computer allowed to be connected rather than any of your computers. So now you can't quite easily edit on 3 different machines at once. If you happen to be sitting in a library, you can't log into your Dropbox and open it if you were to do something like that. You can't do that anymore. So if you're already using Office 365 and having Word, one of the bonus points that comes with it is an entire terabyte of storage in OneDrive with version histories. So you overwrite something like I did, you just go right click, get old version. Yes?
I work in an environment where we collaboratively write these large technical reports, and we have a case number for the report. And then we use the case number, the Julian date, and then the initials of the writer. Mm-hmm. And what we do is anytime we start, we go to the last existing copy. We do a save as with the updated information before we start doing anything. That way, whatever was there isn't going to get screwed with. It exists. Plus, you've got a historical file in case they ever, where I work, they sometimes want to see our historical files for legal purposes. Mm-hmm. So that way, we've got all these records, and it consumes a massive amount of space. But you can always tell who made what changes when, because sometimes they want to know who made what changes when. And you've got everything.
Yeah.
It's when I was making edits to people's files, I'd always name it their file name, my name, .1 whatever. and then so they'd know what version this was, what round of edits it was, exactly what file I needed them to mess with, and what was the newest.
Yeah, and that is a habit building thing. What I'm covering largely here are technical solutions to issues that you can really often solve by being extremely meticulous and careful. I am a creative type. I am not always the most meticulous or the most careful. I'm a computer nerd, but I'm the kind of computer nerd who has a giant stack of hard drives laying on the carpet because I haven't bothered to put them anywhere. So for me, having these even in addition to that kind of discipline and that kind of organization is absolutely imperative. And I recommend to people cloud-based storage also simply because if something happens to your computer, you will still have access to it. I have 2 Mac laptops, roughly this same age. I put everything on these computers in iCloud. If my computers die tomorrow, I can still access the files as they exist on this computer by going into the iCloud website and going through the file tree just like it would be here. They're in the exact same places. So that's another thing you can do. OneDrive kind of can serve that function under Windows. You can do the same thing.
You also want to occasionally back up what's on your cloud because sometimes the worst can happen and stuff like that can get deleted, or your account could get deleted, or you can get locked out of your account forever. Like there's just lots of things.
Yeah,
that can go
one
on.
solution is never good enough. An on-site backup and an off-site backup.
Rule of thumb.
Like I like to have
backup
3 at
industry,
least.
3 locations where you don't care about it.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
And I had those, and I still lost it because I had Time Machine, I had online storage, and I had OneDrive. Nope, not a thing. So we've kind of danced around all kinds of stuff, and we've talked about Word. Comments and track changes are the big issue, and that they're the big issue why for professional work we recommend just using Word. If you can't use Word, getting in touch with the person and seeing if they. I don't know many people who will begrudge you 350 megabytes or however much it takes to install LibreOffice. I don't know anybody who will say no, I refuse if they really want to work with your story. If you're already on shaky ground, that may be a no. But there are other tools that you can use in the creative process that will actually help in the initial and then the manuscript formatting, which is going to bring us to Scrivener. Scrivener is a start to finish story building software. It uses a folder structure to arrange chapter scenes. It can show you can type a summary of a scene. It can show it to you in a little corkboard note card layout. You can rearrange things. It is really worth looking at, and it won't read, or it didn't used to read Word comments and track changes into it. You don't want to use it for your editorial back and forth. But for composition, for manuscript formatting, for final compilation, it is absolutely worth looking into. And this, so it is by a company called Literature and Latte. I forget how much it costs normally. You can usually around NaNoWriMo, there's often a coupon for massive amounts of discount. And you can get it for tablets as well, for iOS tablets.
The portable's $35.
Portable's $35, and the desktop version for PC and Mac is more. And like I said, there are often coupons. It has templates for things that I usually
It's
build.
$49 for Mac.
49 for Mac, so I think it's about the same for PC. It has templates you can use, and I just typically use them for just about everything. If I'm writing a short story, for example, I choose that template, and it puts all of the stuff together. I'll create that as untitled, just for okay, I'll do that. So it has a light mode, a dark mode, etc. You can change all that. I keep everything in dark mode now.
Are you sure you're not a Sith?
I'm a non-canonical gray Jedi. So you want to talk up Scrivener a little bit. Let's have you talk a little bit.
Scrivener's great, buy it. No, so what you see here immediately is a page that just describes what the format you selected is. Scrivener's really great about stuff like that. They'll walk you through what's going on in their program. They have tons of video tutorials online. Scrivener does have a learning curve. There are a lot of features on Scrivener, and it takes a while to get used to using it. But the ones that you use the most, you'll find that you don't even know how you even wrote before you discovered that they existed.
Yeah, it is immensely useful, especially for someone like me. When I write, sometimes if I'm writing a short story, I can often just write it in the order that the story happens. But anything longer, and I will start bouncing around and writing certain scenes to give me a feel for a character, and I'll bounce around. So all this stuff down the left side here is, the main part of here is your manuscript. And scenes go under that. You can do chapters. Chapters act like folders. And you can give everything a name. So this is a scene, right? I can give this, I call it The Fight. And if I go into this, I can actually describe and I can give as much or little detail as I want. It'll appear on this sort of note card. What that will do for you is that gives you the ability to look at the overall structure of your story. I have a hard time with story structure. If I'm not staring at it in some sort of fashion that I can play with, I can do it, but I have a harder time, and this makes that easier for someone like me.
Yeah, go ahead and add another scene there.
Yep.
Is there a trial version of this?
Yes, there's a 30-day free trial to try Scrivener out.
And it's not a restricted trial in any way, shape, or form. Every feature available on Scrivener is available during the trial period.
And the website for them is literatureandlatte.com.
Yes, and you buy the license once, and you can install it on any device you want with one license.
Yeah, any of the type.
The
mobile is different. The mobile is different from the desktop. I have Scrivener on my phone and my iPad because I will often find myself stuck, and I have a big enough screen that I can actually write on a train. And I don't want to pull the laptop out and sit there, and it's uncomfortable trying to do that, or even on a plane somewhere where it's tight space. I'm a large man. I don't have a lot of excess space around me. So anything I can do to make things smaller. Pardon me.
Bless you.
If I've written a scene and that scene is more or less out of order, I realize this scene needs to happen earlier. In Word, you would select that whole thing, cut, and then move up and paste. You can do that. In Scrivener, it has a neat little feature. I can drag this card up, or I could drag the thing around in the file tree on the left, I could reorder the entire story, and then go do the careful stitching to make sure it makes sense at the edges.
Can you convert something directly to a Word document from that?
You can.
Okay.
When you're using Scrivener, like I said, this is mostly for composition, for your own edits, your stuff. Once you start giving it out for feedback and getting comments and track changes, it's not as useful anymore. But in order to get to that point, there is a thing called compile. Now on this one, I haven't done any of the settings changes because I made this dummy user account. Compile is the powerhouse of Scrivener. It outputs it in whatever manuscript format you dictate to it based on your settings. So if I hit compile right now, it's going to give me some formats I can use, or I can do changes myself. There is now a short story Times as opposed to a short story Courier. And it will compile not only the story itself into a Word document, it will generate your title page with using your contact from, if it's on a Mac, it'll do it from your contact in your whatever, or it'll do with whatever setting you set in the project, your address, so you have all that on the page for the publisher. It'll do the headers and footers, page numbering, and word count. All of that is the sort of tertiary stuff you don't ever think about. Yes?
I've submitted stuff like to contests where they want it in PDF, and in Word, because you're not going to get editing in that. In Word, you just save as PDF, so could you do that in this as well?
Yeah, I believe you can compile the output can be a PDF. If you can't, you can do that in Word. You can open it in Word and then export as PDF. But I think, I've never had to do it from here. I think I can do it.
I think it's the compile for option.
You may be right.
It would have it, like PDF is kind
At
of
the
like
top.
the universal standard that you can open this on, right?
Yeah,
There you
that
go.
is.
If you rearrange the stuff and you've got footnotes and stuff, it will automatically sequence all of your footnotes properly, which is really very, very helpful.
Yep. Yeah, I had teachers for years who otherwise would have been having us do papers in Turabian or in Chicago who refused because they didn't want mangled footnotes coming in from every paper that they wouldn't be able to follow, because footnotes used to be a nightmare. The other things you can do with Scrivener is this menu right here that he pointed out. You can export to whatever file type you want. Word. I used to say for Word you wanted to be outputting doc, because docx was inherently weird and buggy and unstable, and now that's kind of reversed. And docx can also be salvaged if it gets corrupted, because it's a container file. Docx is actually kind of a zip file. If you were to change it to .zip, you could open it. And then you would see the code and all of that stuff in the documents inside. It's kind of neat. So you'd want docx. You can do PDF. You can even output to plain text HTML. I'm amazed at this, that Final Draft is listed in here. Final Draft is a long-standing novel writing software that there was Final Draft, and there was a version for doing scripts and all of that. You can do ebook. You can either do Mobi or EPUB files directly from this, if you were so inclined.
Yeah, they're not always pretty. You have to go in and
Yeah, you really have
do
to.
some of your formatting manually there.
I think, you know if they're going to fix the problem where they don't have APA on the Word version, but they have it on the Mac?
Oh, on the PC version? Yes, they will be fixing that, as far as I know, because the PC version hasn't gotten this update yet.
Right.
Yeah.
I think their user base is probably slightly larger in the direction of Mac, so they're a very small company. So
I have this at work, and we have to collectively write these big, huge things. And one of the guys has got a Mac, and we always shuttle everything to him because he can save it in APA.
yeah, the best thing you could do there would be to make your own template to use, but it's even then, you got to make sure you're getting it right. And then building a template in Scrivener is not something I fiddled with, and I'm pretty sure you can do it like you could with Word. But it's a pretty nice tool. It's certainly not the only tool out there. It's not something that I would tell everyone you need to have this, but it's really helpful for a lot of people. Yes?
I actually have a question, because I want to hear from your guys' point of view. So what's the difference between exporting it into just a doc or regular today Word format, or doing it into the compatibility for like the old formats?
Oh, in doc versus docx?
Mm-hmm.
So these days, I have run into weird formatting issues when opening doc files from old versions of Word in new versions of Word. Not always, but they're unpredictable. And I don't know what's causing it, because doc is sort of a little black box. You don't really know what's going on in there in the same way that we do with docx. Docx uses a modified version of XML for everything. I've run into that a few times. Have you guys run into that with older doc files?
I haven't worked with a doc file in a really long time. Like, everything I've gotten recently has always been docx. Like,
I only bring this up really because I'm going to, so I have Anthology Editor A, worked with a lot of stuff. They have sent me all the finished stories in .doc. Everything had to be open in compatibility mode. I'm like, okay, this is weird, but I can handle this. Every one of them that gets exported into InDesign now has random spacing between paragraphs, random extra spacing all over the place, and the point where I have to actually go and put it into plain text mode just to make it workable. Like, oh, I've worked with all these anthologies, no one's told me. Like, you know what, I could probably see most of the publishers being like, oh, well, we like you, so we'll just take care of it for you. Like, so that's one thing, I know a lot of people don't understand the difference between docx and doc. So if you can do docx, because you would think that, oh, it can open in older formats, it's fine. But then it's missing all the tools from every format past 2003. It's a lot of years in that time.
And more than likely, your editors will have the latest version of Word because it is the industry standard. So.
Yeah, and industry standards are weird. I learned from a friend what is the industry standard word processor in the legal profession. It's not Word. It's Word Perfect.
Oh, wow.
That is the industry standard in the legal profession. Yeah.
Does that still exist?
Oh yes, they just released WordPerfect X9 suite. It's a $250 or $300 Office suite. You can buy it outright. They don't do a subscription the way Microsoft does. If you ever want to see a copy, easiest thing to do in the world, go to your nearest Office Depot where you can still find them. They'll have it. They'll have it in there because those are the kind of places that law offices go to quickly grab stuff they need for the office that they didn't think about.
Right.
So it'll be there. But yeah, industry standards are weird, but they're industry standards for a reason. And if everybody sort of collectively agrees, yes, this is what we do, then that makes everyone's lives easier. The easier someone's life is, the more they want to work with you. Industry standard for book publication, compilation, and typesetting. There are alternatives. Industry standard is Adobe InDesign. That may change since Adobe has decided you are not allowed to buy InDesign by itself, and they are raising the subscription rate to $50 a month to buy all their software. And if you want just a couple of pieces of it, well, the heck with you. Microsoft, I'm a child of the 90s. I'm a computer nerd from the 90s, and it really is weird for me to say this. Microsoft did this right.
Yeah.
If they were going to do it based on a subscription, that's how you have to do it. Adobe, I don't know what they think they're doing. There do exist alternatives. Quark Express is still a thing. It is still a thing. It is still made, and on their website, they have a big badge that says no subscription. Now, Quark is about as easy to use as Borland DBase 5.
They want you to have a subscription because they know there are going to be people that are just too lazy to back out of those subscriptions, especially when you have to pay 50% of whatever's left. Like, one of the reasons I keep paying for Adobe is because in order to cancel it, I'd have to find it at the exact month that it would be the last month in order to not have to pay 50% of what's left. I actually have an entire month-long reminder to cancel my Adobe in October.
So you don't forget, and you don't have to pay that terrible, terrible price.
I am still tempted to keep it though because I'm on the student edition, so I only pay $30 a month.
Yeah, I mean that's excessive to me. But you had a question.
Yeah, I just want to go back to why you would use Scrivener in what circumstances. So if you've been using Word, I'm a lawyer, so I'm familiar with Word perfectly. If you've been using Word and you haven't had any creative problem, right? You don't have any deep trouble creating whatever it is there any merit in moving to Scrivener then?
I would say for longer works especially. If you're primarily a short story writer and you've not really had any problems with Word, it also has a lot of things here. Like I have categories for notes and research and template sheets for those. So if I'm writing a story with a lot of characters in it, even a short story, I can go down into here and I can add a character based on that template, and it has a simple little worksheet, or you can make your own, role in the story. What are their goals, their physical description stuff, and all of those things. It's really good for keeping organized. If those are not problems you're having, then maybe it's not right for you. Longer works, I find it better because I can then drag whole scenes out and put them in the, maybe I don't need this, I'll keep it in the rubbish folder until I do need them. I can make notes, I can do, in some of these you can put pictures in, so if you have inspiration for places. In a novel that I've been slowly pecking at for a long time, at least one of the places is inspired by old Victorian men's clubs whose real purpose was other things, but they were like the occult stuff.
Nice.
And so I've got pictures of buildings that had been used for those purposes, like Temple of the Golden Dawn kind of thing. And I put those in Scrivener so that when I need to reestablish the mood of a place and what it does for me, I can just click right over to that and it's there, and I don't have to try to remember what I hunted for on Google image search. So all of that is it does make it immensely useful for that. But again, it's if you're not having those problems or you're doing fine, it's a nice additional tool, but it's not something that necessarily would be a primary tool. Yes?
Are most vanilla publications also reject LibreOffice or Columbus?
Like, what do you mean by vanilla publications?
Not furry.
They'll probably ditch you real fast.
Okay.
Like, I've never submitted to any myself. Have you guys?
I have. I mean, it goes back to that submission guidelines thing. They may not catch it if you export from OpenOffice into a docx file at first, but if they start going back and forth with you and doing comments for any reason, or it causes them formatting problems, they may finish out with this because there's timing and contracts involved, but if you create problems for them, that can close doors for you and you may never know why.
So like it might not even accept a LibreOffice document?
If it's in a doc format, like I said, if it opens in Word and it looks fine, they're not going to dig deeper until they have to work with it. So they would probably, if your story was good enough, they would accept it. And honestly, at that point, who knows? You might get lucky. You might get lucky every time. It's just one of those situations where one time it causes a major issue and all of a sudden the skies open up.
So it would be better to just
Just get Word. Like, it doesn't even have to be a new version of Word. You can go on eBay and find older versions of Word, and as long as they'll run on your computer, those will work. Just anything like 2010 on. Like, sometimes you can even find computers where they're already pre-installed.
Yeah, like I repair computers freelance for a living. So it's like very often there will be Office installed from an old disk or something. It'll still be there. I will clean up, make a new user account, wipe the free space on the hard drive, and now that computer just happens to have Office installed. And I'll sell it on eBay. I don't advertise it that way, but this computer is 6, 7 years old. It's $50 or whatever it gets me, and then they get it and there's Word on it.
Yeah.
Bonus. Check. There are ways around this, and going in with friends on an Office 365 subscription is possible.
Mm-hmm. Up to 5 devices.
Up to 5 devices. You can have it up up to 5 devices. You can install it on any number of devices, and you can be signed into 5 on a subscription. So even if you have multiple machines and you're using your part of the account.
So if you just have a writer friend who has one, odds are they might just let you have it. Like I've done that for friends where they're just like, I need Word. I'm like, here.
Something else I'll add is any college, university will have current versions of Word if you have a student ID. Also, any public library, you can go in, they have current versions of Word.
I mean, obviously for certain types of things that people in the furry fandom will write, that may not be an option to sit in a library and do it. But definitely check your local library for things. Because there's also, in my area, there are libraries that have loaner laptops. You can take those into a study room and do work on those. So if you have a USB key, or you can put the file into cloud storage, you can even do that there and you won't even have to pay a cent. Public libraries are amazing, and I cannot talk them up enough, especially in a panel this short, for this kind of thing. But it all depends on how funded your library is, what kind of priority they put on that sort of thing, etc. But that's a very good point. More things.
I'm kind of tapped.
Kind of tap. Do we have any more questions or things people want to know about? Because we can, yes.
Do any of you have any experience with like some of the newer, a lot of these are kind of like web-based, like the really heavy editing programs like AutoCrit, like ones that are used for heavily editing, and you can import files from either Google Docs or Word or whatever, and then it checks for like a whole slew of types of writing in pieces.
Like, I've tried Grammarly before, but that seems to be more focused on sort of a professional environment rather than a creative one. Like,
I got a good one.
yeah.
So there's a free one called Edit Minion that basically does the same thing, and it is very much fiction focused. It'll tell you, where your adverbs are and all that. And if you just Google search Edit Minion, it'll come right up, and it's totally free. You paste in your story, and it spits out with different colored highlights of what the issues are.
I did the same thing. I don't know if it's still around. It's been a while since I used it, but it was called Hemingway, and it would highlight overused phrases. It would highlight redundant construction. It would highlight awkward pronoun antecedents, I believe. So if you weren't getting your nouns and pronouns paired together in a way that it found flowed well, it would highlight those.
It would also highlight difficult sentences to read. Yellow for kind of difficult, red for very difficult. Yeah.
So all of my sentences,
Yeah.
red. I have to turn that setting off because just the whole page is red. I'm known for overly complicated but correct sentences. Yes.
There's a thing online where you can fry scale writing samples, and you can just take what you've written, and it's like one of the tabs, like the Gunning Fog Index and stuff like that, where you can take something you've written up to, I think it's 2,500 words, just cut and paste it in there, and it will look at it, and it'll grade at what level your stuff is written. It will identify your mistakes, but it also gives you some interesting things like how many words per sentence, how many syllables per sentence, things like this that let you know at what level you're writing, whether you're writing something that's overly complicated, or whether you're writing, if you know that you're writing something at the 10th grade level, and you're sitting there writing something, and all of a sudden it comes up at the 18th grade level, which is way past grad school, it tells you screwed up. Right. And it's a handy free tool.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Something I do is I put all of my stories through Flesh Kincaid to get the readability, because my target grade level, reading level, is between 6th and 8th grade. And I know that sounds low, but
That's standard.
yeah, you got to remember that the average federal judge reads at a 6th grade level.
Yeah.
So
Average technical report is written, the average technical report for a layman is written at a 4th grade level. They beat us to death with that statistic.
Sometimes that's still too complicated.
And I'm over here going, and I write how I write, and if people can get a dictionary. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, these sort of analytical programs that you're talking about, do you as editors use them to winnow out your slush pile, or do you just read everything that comes across your desk?
I can usually tell in the first paragraph if I'm going to like a story or not. Like, sometimes I'll read farther than that, but if I'm past the first paragraph and I already know it's trash, it's just going to go into the trash.
And for me, because working in Furry is working in smaller slush piles than professional, it's a matter of I go until I find something that makes me stop. So I don't use those tools I use those tools on my own writing. I don't really see the value in doing it to someone else's writing when I'm sitting here going, okay, for me, this works and this doesn't. It's a more, I guess the term would be sort of an organic process. So I'm reading it, I'm like, okay, making notes. Like, so far I'm invested. This threw me, but the whole story as a whole, okay. And then that's how I will make those decisions. I don't ever get to a situation, at least I don't ever that often get to a situation where someone's structure is such that I can't do it. There are a couple of stories I've critiqued where they were incredibly hard to read for me for 5-6 pages, and then something clicked and I realized all of what that was supposed to be, and then my brain backfilled and I was able to do it. But looking at it, it was just this complicated web work and not work. And I have a terminal degree. I have a pretty high reading level, and if it's confusing me, I'm going, okay, we're going to have to work with that to make that flow better. So it does happen when it'll trip me up, but more often than not, it's a how does it feel? Does it convey what it's trying to convey? Does it stay true to its own themes?
And I'm not an editor, but I have seen them on TV. So
Stop watching my CCTV footage, Mog.
So this is just secondhand, but a lot of editors in the fandom have told me that much more so than mainstream publication, they will give stories a benefit of the doubt and give it a read through. And that's people from Fur Planet, from Sofa Wolf. I've been told that by multiple editors across the fandom.
Because it's a matter of smaller slush piles mean more time is available. Not a whole lot of time, because the trade-off is that all of us are working in other jobs. But we are more likely to spend that time. In the same way that fandom editors are more likely to spend time developing a story, doing developmental edits, like fundamental structural edits, because we see something in it, and all you need to do is get the sandpaper out and sand off the rough corners and give it a nice spit shine, and now it's a really great story and a good fit for a book. We have the time to do that because the publication timeline is not market dependent. You know, it's furry, it's going to appeal to a certain set of furries because our stuff is for us. So that's sort of where we end up with it. It's just a matter of the time gets spent differently here. Are there more questions or things people want to know about? Yes.
This is I kind of was waiting until we were towards the end because I know it's a little bit off topic, but I am a writer in like anime fandoms, and I want to get into writing for furries and doing like furry fiction. Any suggestions on good places to start?
Can I take this?
Yes, by all means, start off.
Okay, so I recommend that you get a Fur Affinity account and you get a SoFurry account, because those are the two big ones. Post your stories on there and use the tagging systems. If you do that, people will find your work and you'll start building a fan base, a reader base. If you're consistent, if you produce a lot of content, your reader base will grow exponentially. It will grow very fast. Like if you can do like one story a week, it'll grow very fast. If you can do one a day, yeah, that gets kind of where, you know, quantity quality issues. But it will grow extremely fast.
And for FA, there's a couple other things to keep in mind. You want to make sure you have the story in a format that it actually displays. Because if you upload a Word document straight to it, someone will have to download that document, and it's another click that they have to take, and more likely they're not going to link your story. Also, you want to use icons on all of your stories on FA, because if something is just the square generic icon where it's clearly someone has taken no time or effort into it, a lot of people won't click on those stories, unless they're looking for something very, very specific and they're desperate.
What exactly do you mean by icons?
A thumbnail image.
Yeah, a thumbnail, yeah. It can be something simple, like you can just take like your normal icon, put a white layer, white transparent layer over it, and then write the title and maybe like a keyword or two. Or it could just be like a solid color with some text on it that kind of is the title and it explains it a little bit. But just something like that shows that you took the time and effort, and more people are going to click on it.
And so furry is kind of my roots. So looking at well, like on FA, just looking at the raw numbers, stories that don't have any thumbnails get far fewer views than stories with thumbnails, even if they're just simple thumbnails with a story title on, white background, black letters, story title.
Yeah. So my perspective is different because I'm a very slow writer. I'm a very wordy writer. It comes along with those complex sentences I talked about, which I do try to make readable, but I don't have a whole lot of time that I spend where I can write a short story. My short stories are 10,000 words. So that's a lot of work and a lot of editing for me to throw it up online for people to read, even to get a fan base. So I have very seldom done that to my own detriment. That said, also to get started writing for furries, read furry fiction. And this is not a buy my book kind of thing. You can read stories posted on any of the sites because they get, like on So Furry, they have an upvoting system, right?
Yeah,
Still?
they have, there's most popular, and you can sort that by day, week, month, year, all time.
There in the dealer's room right now, there are, you have a table?
5?
No, you don't have a table. So there are between 3 and 5 publishers down there. They're the big 2 that are in there. They're Sofa Wolf and Fur Planet. Some of that fiction, even if you're not going to buy, go talk to them at their table and see what they recommend based on what you like to read. Because I guarantee you, if you like, well, hey, do you like Doctor Who? Well, I have this book about a magical time dog named Summerhill. I will sell you this book, and you will probably enjoy it. I hope you will. Or if you like science fiction with intrigue, there's actually, I think Thousand Leaves and Seven Chalk are out of print, but there are all these titles that are across multiple genres. So find something that you might be interested in, and then just start noting those authors' names and seeing what they, even if you don't want to buy something immediately, see what they posted online. They will post at least excerpts of stories or little short snippets or full stories, depending on who it is. All of that. So if you see what's being put out by the people who are really pushing hard to do it in a more professional way, that will give you a sort of idea of what's out there. And if you combine that knowledge with knowledge of what's being posted by the average fiction writer on Fur Affinity and So Furry, you'll have a pretty good idea of what's out there, what people like, what they are interested in, or where there's a gap in what's being put out.
And if you want more of a guide on how to submit to FA and actually have the text show up, like some of the things that you can do in order to get people to see it, I actually have a video called How to Submit the Story to Fur Affinity on YouTube. And I go in this 10-minute explanation of how to do that, what the file formatting you need to do is. It's a little out of date because you can actually do it from Word, Google Docs now, but I just do it on Word. So.
We're running pretty low on time. Does anybody else have any last questions? Yes.
I want to drag you all the way back to the beginning. You made a comment about something like these aren't small presses, these are micro presses. That went right over my head. What exactly does that mean?
So it was okay. So a small press is kind of a blanket term. It's an independent publisher that isn't tied to one of the big publishing houses like Random House or that sort. And micropress, I think, actually has a definition, and I probably misused it. But there are small presses out there like Red Adept Publishing or things like that. They sell primarily in fan con circles, like at sci-fi cons, things like that, and in digital form. But you're not going to see them in a bookstore like Barnes and Noble. furries are that, but our market is much smaller. We are a niche market. Our people from outside the fandom who don't really know about us, kind of the first and last question they want to know is, why is animals? and so like you get mainstream writers like Lawrence Schoen, who wrote Barsk and Moons of Barsk. That is in every way a furry novel, but there is a means by which the readers in the
He was
mainstream
the first main press guy to get a Coyote Award.
access. Yeah. No,
I don't know about Kyle. Ursula.
I can't remember.
Not Ursula. Ursa Major.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've given out to like mainstream stuff, but I don't know about Kyle because they haven't been around as long, have they?
No, not even nearly as long.
I think you're right though.
Yeah, I
think-
talked with him at the World Fantasy Con.
Okay.
About that.
Yeah.
And he's very proud of that. He's
Yeah,
also
because he
there's
wrote-
supposed to be a third book in that trilogy,
Yeah.
but he's having a hard time with the whole publisher thing.
Put him in touch with Furplan.
I was just about to say that. Buzz would love those.
Yeah, he would. But there's that stuff, and it's a different sort of lens, because that can be marketed to the mainstream, even though it's incredibly furry. Most of the time, things with anthropomorphic animals in them are primarily humans with one or two quote unquote furry characters, and that's the big difference between our publishers and outside.
Funny enough, Barsk is actually hard to sell to furries because of its covers. It has a very traditional sci-fi cover, and it doesn't have a furry cover. So
Right.
furries will see that and not pick it up. But like, if you were to release it through like Fur Planet and we did something else, that book would probably sell a lot better.
That's why Kismet had 2 covers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I have thoughts on that. Anyway,
Furries like pictures.
yeah, we like animal pictures. Although the Kamui covers for 1,000 Leaves and Seventh Chakra are about they're almost furry versions of mainstream covers.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you guys for coming. I am Sparf basically everywhere. There's only one other Sparf, and it's not a furry. He's a Norwegian guy who smokes a lot, does rants about things on YouTube. He hasn't posted in forever, so I'm just Sparf most places. You can find me. You can find my stuff somewhere, and if you have questions, I'll do my best to answer them. How about you guys? Where can we find you?
Oh, I'm Mog Moogle. On Twitter, it's Mog_K_Moogle. And we actually have a furry podcast now, furry literature review podcast called Up Fur Review. The fur is a fur pun, F-U-R. That's at Up Fur Review on Twitter. That's Jaden Dracus, TJ Mind, and myself. We review furry literature. So give that a listen if you would. We'd appreciate it.
I'm Saint Ajax 33 on everything except FA because I can't change my username there, so I'm Saint Ajax on there. I have a Twitter, I have a SoFurry, I have nothing else than that, and other than FA. I guess I have a YouTube too that I always forget about. I have some business cards with that info on it if you want it. Just leave these there.
I definitely don't, because I'm prepared. All right, thanks, guys. I don't know what the next panel is, but enjoy that one too.
And then InDesign screwed me for these.